I've come to realize that so many people end the year in some sort of disappointment. Some have major disappointment. And when I talk about disappointment, I mean they are sad about something that they didn't achieve. So I hardly ever see people or talk to people that um, analyze their year and say, it has been a great year. It has been an awesome year. It has been a fulfilling year. If there was anything about this year I were to change, I wouldn't change anything. I hardly meet people that tell me I am satisfied with the way the year has gone. So you always find people saying it has been good, but then I wish I could. I wish I would have. And those are even the good. Those are even the good reports. The people that wish they could. But then you have people that say it has not been a good year. I feel really disappointed. I set out to do this thing, I didn't do it. A lot of people give themselves a very bad report card at the end of the year. So they feel very unfulfilled going into the new year. They feel very unfulfilled. And that's why you see that going into the new year, you see quite a number of people going to the new year with um, some level of um, overzealousness to make up for how disappointing the previous year has been. And those are the people you find with really long lists of New Year resolutions, because they're like, I'm not going to waste this year like I did the last year. I'm going to. I'm determined to have a better year than last year. And from just talking with people, I I kind of realized that there are three classes of people that end up with a bad report card at the end of the year and seriously want to make up for it the next year. I'm going to be talking to you about those three classes of people. But first of all, I think I want us to have at the back of our minds that the year can only make sense when God is the center. The year can only make sense when God is the center. Your life can only make sense when God is the center. It's funny how we assess a lot of our lives in years. A year is a way of assessing your life. In this thing that we call 365 days, 12 months, 54 weeks or so, I think, or 52 weeks, I'm not even sure. But then it is a lot of times we assess our lives that way. But our lives can be assessed also in minutes. Our lives can be assessed in hours. Our lives can be assessed in days or in weeks. But what I want you to know is whatever the unit of assessment of your life is, it can only make sense if the center of your life is God. It can only make sense if the center of your life is God. I remember when I started speaking and teaching and mentoring, you understand, I was very conscious about the God factor, talking about God. And I remember having a discussion with my wife and saying, I'm talking to people and advising them, especially about business, but I just feel like it's very intrusive to talk about God. It, I feel that was I was telling my wife that I really feel that's a different container, and I should keep that apart. And if anything leads us to the God conversation, then I can talk about God. And so I thought it was only appropriate to talk about God in a church gathering, or when I was talking, to a fellow um, believer. So I used to put God aside. So I said God aside and just focus on um, the issue, which might be a business issue. But then I knew that what I was saying wasn't tying up. So I used to talk with people, especially my mentees, and give them advice and just put God aside. But I realized that a lot of what I was telling them wasn't working. And I told my wife this, and my wife told me, then you need to put God in it. You need to tell them your truth. And since then, I was like, okay, you know what? Let's say the whole truth. And whoever thinks this guy is being a religious fanatic or religious nut can think what they want to think. But then you're telling people the whole truth and you're bearing it all and you're allowing them to go and choose whether or not to use that truth. And to be very honest with you, since I started telling my truth, and I call it my truth, but it's not really my truth, I believe it is the truth. I've been getting more positive feedback from people. People telling me about how what I shared or what I've shared with them has helped to change their lives and how they've been seeing results. And that's why I decided to start off this podcast by just laying down that fact that if God is not the center, if you do not know how to hear from God, if you do not know what it sounds like to hear from God, and when we talk about hear from God, a lot of us think of um, audible sound. But then let's not constrain into that, because when I say hear from God can be a feeling rather than a hearing. Do you understand? But if you do not know what that is, what that means to you to hear from God, then I would say drop every other thing that you are building right now in your life, whatever it is, and make that the priority. Make that the priority. Because that means there's a disconnect. Because the human being, I don't care what the faith is, what your faith is. And when I talk about faith, I'm talking about what we might regard as your religious belief is. We were all made to hear from God. We were all made to hear from God. So if you do not know what that feels like, it means there's a disconnect. It's just like if you have an appliance and there's a plug. As long as the appliance is connected to the socket, current flows into that appliance. It is an easy flow. It's an easy flow. If that appliance doesn't know what current feels like, it means that that appliance has been disconnected from the socket. So what you need to do is find that socket again and put the appliance back in the socket. Put the plug of the appliance back in the socket, and then you will feel current again. I really believe there are people listening here today that ending the year, going into a new year, your priority should be connecting that plug to the socket and feeling what it means for current to flow through you so that you can function. So there's no need listening to anything. Is that an appliance is of no use if it cannot find a socket. If it cannot find a socket, it's of no use. So no matter how much I try to advise you and to give you direction, nothing can work. So the functions are still very, are still in workable conditions. But without that current, the functions cannot manifest. So the first thing should be to find your way back to the socket. The plug must be in the socket. So somebody needs to find God and know what it is to hear from God. That's the first step in God being your center. God cannot be your center if you do not know his voice or feel his presence or know his leading. Cannot be your center. Cannot be your center. So, as I said, I want to talk about three types of people that end the year on a failed report card. And I want you to listen in if you feel you're one of these people. I think the first category of people that I noticed that end the year with oh man, it has not been a good year, bad report card, are the people I call the distracted. The distracted. And I realize that these people are increasing every single year. They increase as technology advances. There are more and more people that go into their year distracted. They're called the distracted. They have no center. They have no center. So what they do is that they look out for what's hot and what's not, what's trending and what's not, what's loud and what's not. And with the advent of social media, distraction has heightened. It's incredible how many people I meet beginning of the year that tell you, oh, I'm going to do a UI course or a UX course. I'm going to start learning something on photography based on something they stumbled on, based on something they watched, based on something they heard. That's the beginning of the year. So January, they're all psyched about UI UX or photography. They're all psyched about it. And then they get to like April, May, and then they are distracted by real estate or crypto. You understand? They're distracted by that and like, oh, I really want to go into this right now and do this. Because there's so much noise around that. And then they go into the year again. Some months later, they are distracted by the next thing. And they are distracted by the next thing. And by the end of the year, they've amassed so much distraction that they don't know that they haven't built anything. There is nothing they can put a finger on as following through and achieving, because they are massively distracted. They are distracted not just in a choice of what to commit themselves to career-wise, even in simple activities like reading a book. So they start a book and then they are distracted by the next book. And then they're distracted by the next book. And then they're distracted. So for every single thing, they've not finished anything. They've opened like 50 books in the year, but they haven't gone past chapter 5 in any of them. They're massively distracted. Let's not even talk about courses, online courses. So many courses downloaded on Domestika, Seller, you understand? So many. Spend so much money on courses, but then there's a distraction because for everyone that is advertised, they feel they need to get it. So they are distracted, heavily distracted. And at the end of the year, they haven't finished any course. They've listened to so many podcasts, but they haven't completed any. They haven't completed any show or any episode of a podcast. They start listening to the podcast and then stop. Next day they're distracted, start another one, start another one. So they never ever get any true information or true value because they never followed through. They never follow through. Distraction. So a lot of these people start the year with some pseudo focus. They finish the year feeling heavily invested, but very little commitment. And so they feel like they've betrayed themselves. They feel like a lot has gone to waste. They feel they are really no better than when they started the year. Because the truth was that what led their year were their eyes and their ears. So as long as it was shiny, they felt they had to get it. As long as it sounded good, they felt it was for them. It was that shiny object syndrome. Shiny, let's do this. Shiny, let's join this. Shiny, let's download this. Shiny, let's read this. Shiny, let's sign up for this. They're distracted. Remember what I said, that God must be the center. The distracted can never end the year with a good report card because they are moving and being guided by their eyes and their ears. Is it shiny? Does it sound good? You must be led by God. Not by the shiny object, but by the light. You must be led by God. There are so many things that are shiny that you can admire, but you must keep moving. Forget about the shiny objects. Follow the light. Light. God is the light. Some of you going into next year need to be more conscious about the light, which is God. Yes, it sounds good, but is it meant for me? Yes, it looks good, but is it meant for me? As I said, if you do not know what it's like to hear God, or to feel God, or to know God leading you, that should be your first resolution for the year. Forget about how long it takes you. And I'll tell you one thing. A lot of us make more of it, of this hearing of God, than it actually is. I will tell you the truth. We were all made to hear God. We were all made to feel God. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of us have been estranged. We have wandered away. We have wandered away from God. We have, and when I say wandered away, it doesn't mean that there is a distance, but there is a desensitization. There can never be a distance from God because God is all around you. But the problem is you have become less aware. You are less aware, so you don't think about God. I think the best illustration I can use is oxygen. How many times a day does the thought of oxygen cross your mind? It doesn't. It doesn't. A lot of people are not conscious. You don't spend a day thinking about oxygen. You understand? But it's everywhere around you. You become desensitized to the awareness of it. So you have no regard for it. But if I ask the question, how many times a day do people think about money? A lot of people, money takes up 90% of their thoughts. Even though it's not as abundant as oxygen, they've sensitized themselves so much to the thought of money that they are more aware of it than they are about oxygen. They are more aware about the rules of how to get it than they are aware about this thing that they need to live, oxygen. So, the same thing with God. God is with you. He has always been. He's not far from you. But the problem is you are less aware of God. So because you are less aware, you do not know what it feels like to hear from him, even though he's speaking to you every single time. You haven't used that language in such a long time that you don't even know what it is. You don't know what it is. You don't know what it sounds like. It doesn't make sense to you anymore. But to become more aware, all you need to do is begin to focus your mind more on God. A lot of us don't focus our minds on God. That's why we can't hear from God. But the more you focus your mind on God, and it's a conscious focusing on of your mind, conscious focusing of your mind on God, that's the beginning of prayer. That's the beginning of prayer. It is I wouldn't even call it the stealing of the mind. Because a lot of people believe, oh, I must steal my mind. That's a very hard thing to do. But then it starts with the focusing of the mind, the awareness that number one, I accept that there's a God. I accept that there's a God. I accept that this God is in charge of my life. This God made me. This God made everything around me and is aware of me. I want to be more aware of Him. That's the beginning of prayer. The telling yourself, I want to be more aware of this God that I know exists, that made me and made everything around me, that is aware of me. I think to be less distracted, you need to be more invested in knowing what God wants of you. Or else you will always go for the shiny objects rather than the light. So the first set of people, the distracted. The second set of people that end the year giving themselves a bad report card and saying this has not been a good year, or I wish. They have more I wishes at the end of the year than more gratitude. Are the people I call the frustrated. The frustrated. Now, for this class of people, they are more aware, less distracted by shiny objects, and more aware that there is a need to do what God is leading you to do. So they're a step ahead of distracted people. They know that there is a God. They know what it is to hear from God. They know what it feels like. They have a connection. They have a relationship. They have a communication with God. They are not so shiny object motivated, but they have an Achilles heel. They have one thing, one major thing that distracts them, which is the self. Is the self. And I call these people frustrated because they have the mindset, even when they feel, okay, I really feel there's a leading from God to do this thing. They have this mindset, I will do it after I have done this. So the biggest contention in their life, a lot of time, are their goals, their own personal goals, the things they want. They are clear about what they want. So they're not like distracted people that want whatever shines in their face. But they have this really, really, really strong sense of ambition, something they want to do. The problem is they prioritize that thing over that thing that they know that God is leading them to do. It's the sense of ambition. So that, like, I'll give an example. They feel a strong leading from God to start to. I'll give an example, like maybe someone who is into photography and they feel a strong leading to start to teach photography. You teach young children photography, and and it's clear to them because, as I said, they 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 have a connection with God. They have a relationship with God. They know what it is to hear from God. So God is saying, go ahead and start this photography school for juniors, for young people, young children. So they're clear about that. But the biggest obstacle they have is their ambition for their photography career. So they think about it and they're like, okay, I'll do it. But then I want to cover like 10 major weddings this year. That's always been what I wanted to do. 10 prestigious weddings. I have this ambition to make 100 million naira from photography. 100 million naira. That is my personal goal, to make 100 million. So in their scale of preference, that comes first before teaching young children photography. It is that thing that they want to do. I want to do this photography course first, this online Harvard photography course. That's the first thing I want to do. Once I complete that, then I will begin to teach the children. I call them the frustrated because what normally happens is by the end of the year, they realize that they are not where they want to be with their personal ambition and they've not started their spiritual living. A lot of times, that's the frustration they have. God is leading them up one mountain, but then they say, I would get to that mountain, but first I need to climb my own mountain first. Once I'm done climbing this mountain, I'll get down and get to your mountain, God. Let me just get up this small mountain of mine. They're frustrated because once they start climbing that mountain of personal ambition, they get to a place where they think they've gotten to the top. And once they get to that place that they think is the summit, they realize it's just another step that reveals another height. So they see themselves, they keep and keep and keep climbing. And they realize that they're never getting there. They never get to the summit. Every time they're climbing and say, okay, I'm just going to try to do this. They realize, oh, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. And then they spend all their time climbing this mountain of personal ambition that they never ever get to do the climbing that God is asking them to do in the first place. It's a frustration. Because as long as they're climbing that mountain of personal ambition, there is also a guilt that they feel as they climb it that tells them, you shouldn't be doing this right now. The more time you're putting into this, the more time you're taking away from what you should really be doing. So they try to hurry the climbing, but they're never getting to the summit. And before you know it, the year has ended. They feel no personal fulfillment. They don't feel like they've hit any marks. They feel tired. And they feel an all-round sense of frustration. All-round sense of frustration. Because as I said, there is no fulfillment outside God at the center of your life. God must become the priority. When it says, follow me, you must drop everything you are doing, personal ambition included, and follow him. The Bible says in Mark 1:20, one day I just woke up and that was the scripture on my mind, and says, immediately Jesus called them and they left their father Zebedee in the boat along with the other laborers. When Jesus called James and John, their brothers, they were working for their father. And Jesus called them, and immediately they left their father. They didn't wake up in that morning. They didn't wake up that morning thinking that was going to be their last day at the job. But immediately Jesus called them. Immediately they left their father in the boat. And the rest of their fellow workers left them that day. That was the last day they worked on that boat. You see, a lot of you, God is calling you to do certain things, but you're telling God, I'll do it once I get done with this. Let me just finish this first. God told you this thing you were meant to do from the beginning of the year. The problem was yourself. Your personal ambition. That was the problem. That is the problem. We're here at the end of the year and you're frustrated because you have not fulfilled your personal ambition and you've not started at all what God is asking you to do. God is not asking for balance. God is asking for obedience. God is not asking for balance. God is asking for obedience. So if you go into next year again trying to balance things, you would be at this point again in December with your life totally out of balance, you tired and frustrated. I'll say this again. God is not asking for balance. God is asking for obedience. So those are the frustrated people. The third category of people that end the year scoring themselves with, very low in their report card, saying, not really been a good year. They feel unfulfilled. Are the people I would call the tormented. The tormented. And you see, to be very honest with you, I can identify with all these categories. The distracted, the frustrated. But I think at this particular stage in my life, I can really identify with the tormented. So when I'm talking to this category of people, I know how it feels. Because very recently I felt that way. Very recently. And it is what I've dealt with majority of the year. So I totally know how it feels to be tormented. And I'll explain what that means. You see, The distracted are too distracted to hear from God. They have no concept of God speaking. The world around them is too loud. The world around them is too loud for them to hear God. The frustrated know what it's like to hear God, but the world within them is too loud. That self, that sense of ambition, the world within them, what they want to achieve on their inside, their own personal dreams, too loud that it drowns out God's voice. Now, we have the tormented. Now, these people hear God, they know what God wants them to do. To a large extent, they obey what God tells them to do. And I won't say to a large extent, outrightly, they do. They obey what God tells them to do. So they're able to still the voices around them and still the voice within them. But all this time, we've been talking about voices of people, voices of other people, and the voice of self. But there's a very strong voice that we've not talked about yet. And I say the very strong voice because other voices are physical. The voice of people advertising stuff to you, shiny stuff, physical. Voice within you, it's your voice, it's physical, it's your voice. Understand? The ambition is your voice. But then there's the spiritual voice that contends with God's voice. So you have the battle of two spiritual voices. And that there is the biggest problem. The battle of two spiritual voices. And this is where the fall of man started from. The battle of the voice of God and the voice of the devil. The voice of God and the voice of the devil. The biggest battle ever. And this is where the tormented come in. They do what God wants. But at the end of the day, you have the devil speak to you and tell you, was it really worth it? Is it really worth it? What you've done, do you think it's really worth it? The result of this thing you've done, that you feel, oh, I've done God's work. What's the result? And tells you, see all you've missed out on. See all you are missing out on. What it does a lot is to compare. It points you to other people. You say you are doing what God is leading you to do, teaching young children photography. See what your mate, that is, photography is not half as good as yours. See, just bought a car, just built a house, just rented a studio, just bought new equipment. But you're here, end of the year, all you can say is that you taught 10 children how to shoot, and their photos are not even all that good. Is this sense of fulfillment, is it really worth it? And a sense of having all these things. See what your mates have. It tells you. Spend so much time doing what you feel God has been telling you to do, but then it has stopped you from putting yourself out there. Because you're not out there, see your mates. They're in relationships, planning their weddings, but you are doing God's work, right? Does that get you a spouse? Does that build you a family in the future? The voice of the devil. It torments you about the blessing of God. That was the biggest problem of Adam and Eve. even while they were in this blessed state, that we would do anything to have right now in this fallen world, they were living right in that blessed state. The devil came and spoke to them about whether that blessing was truly a blessing or a handicap. That is the torment. I say I can relate with this, or relate to this, or people that are going through this, because I go through it too. Ever since I devoted myself to teaching through this podcast, the devil has always asked me, so you think what you're doing right now is making sense? You think you're moving forward with your life, right? You think these messages you get from people is what you would tender at the bank when you need to pay those bills, right? You think this is not going to end in disgrace, right? You think when you stand with your peers, it's enough for you to say this is what you're doing and they wouldn't laugh at you, right? That is the torment. And it's very easy for you to end your year on a lie, on the lie that the devil torments you with. And if there's somebody here listening and you've committed to what God is asking you to do, you've been obedient, I want you to know that the devil would come tormenting. He did it to Christ and made him feel like, a lot of people feel the temptation of Christ ended on, turn this bread to stone, jump from this, I'll give you all the riches. No. Even the night before his death, or the night of his death, or the night before his death, he felt tormented. Felt like it's not worth going through with this thing. Is it really worth it dying for these people? They don't understand jack of what you've taught them. It's not worth it. You will die and be forgotten. The devil tormented Christ. He will torment you. While you are making progress, he will torment you. And you'll give yourself a bad report. Unless once again you choose to listen and remember what God, the center of your life, is saying. And that's why I still come back to, you would always have a bad report card if God is not the center of your life and you do not know what he's saying per time. The only way I survive and get over this tormenting experience of the devil telling me, this God doesn't love you. This thing God is telling you to do will only bring embarrassment and shame and loss. The only way I get over it is by remembering what God tells me, either through his spoken word, his written word, or his inspired feeling in me through his spirit to encourage me and give me strength again. It's very easy to be doing the right thing and still end the year with a bad report card for yourself. Self-assessed bad report card. Because you're tormented and you're listening to lies. So I want to encourage someone today who is listening, and you've committed yourself to something that you truly believe that God is asking you to do. I want you to know that God is proud of you. You need to hear his voice saying you are his child and is incredibly proud of you. And you're blessed. You're blessed. I want you to know that God is with you and he's blessing you. The only reason why the devil is tormenting you because he knows how blessed you are. That's the only reason why you are worth tormenting in the first place. Because he knows you are on the right path. Because he knows you are on the right path, on the way to a very glorious life. And if you're listening to this today and you're frustrated because you have put God's work on the shelf and you promise to get to it after you're done with yours, I want to tell you, you will never be done with yours. It's an illusion. Like a mirage in the desert. The more you move closer to that body of water you think you can see, the farther it goes. The farther it goes. You need to let go of ambition and surrender to mission. What is God asking you to do for Him? Do it first. Do it first. For the distracted person, you know that all your resources have gone into other things that people have sold to you. You've been victims of people's silver tongues and shiny objects. You know, the year is coming again and you're going to be going after shiny objects. There's so many. As long as you have the internet, you have social media, they are gearing up for you. You need to take some time away, some time off these things and connect once again to God. And I say once again because, as I said, we were all made to hear from God. Some of us have pulled away from the socket. You need to put that plug back in the socket. Or else those shiny objects will continue to get you. They will continue to get you. And at the end of your life, you would have amassed a lot but achieved nothing. You would have amassed a lot but achieved nothing. God has to be the center of our life. God has to be the center of our lives. When God becomes the center of your life and He opens your eyes, at the end of the year, you feel fulfilled. You see, I was talking with a friend of mine, and as we were talking, I was telling him, okay, it's the end of the year, and we're talking about rounding up work. And I was asking him when I was going to round up work, and I said, okay, I'll round up work like a week to Christmas and just round up, stop recording podcasts and stuff like that, and just get to rest. But immediately I finished that conversation, I felt a burden in my spirit. And the burden was my spirit telling me, why are you rounding up like you are laboring? Why are you taking a break like a laborer? Why do you feel a need to do what other people are doing? Because everyone's rounding up. You feel you must round up too to take a break. I'm like, a lot of people are rounding up because they are laboring under distraction or under ambition. You are on a mission. There is no taking a break because this work fuels you. And I had to think to myself, Tola, do you do this work like a labor or is it like a flow? And I have to be honest with myself, this thing is a flow. I don't squeeze myself to do it. It gives me a sense of fulfillment. It gives me a sense of meaning. When I feel hungry when I'm feeling hungry and I record this podcast or I talk to someone or advise someone, I feel like I've eaten. I'll never forget a day that I was dealing with this terrible sinus headache. And it was affecting me for hours. And then I got a call from somebody saying they wanted to have a conversation with me from some of my mentees, a group of them. I normally used to meet with them on Fridays. And he called me and said, sir, it's Fridays, that time to have that call. And I was having this sinus headache. And, I felt, okay, I've committed myself to this call. I need to have this call. And I remember getting on that call. And 2 minutes into the call, sinus headache gone. Totally gone. And my sinus freed up. And I felt great. And I spoke for about 2 hours with them. And I was like, Tola, just a minute before this call, you felt like you had to be on the bed, relaxing and, getting over this sinus headache. I felt like I needed an aspirin. But I didn't need that. All I needed to do was to get back to doing the work of God. And I felt good. I felt good the entire day. Sinus gone. That's what the work of God does. So when you take a break from it, you open yourself to the things that you should be overcoming. You open yourself to the vulnerabilities of illnesses, because you don't understand that doing that God work fills you up. Fills up your immune system. Fills you up even when it comes to your needs. A lot of times we are hustling for our needs because we are not doing God's work. God has been so amazing to me this year. He has shown me that once I do his work, he meets my needs. He has met all my needs, my family's needs. And I just think, where does this hustle mentality come from? God meets my needs. If I can do a podcast on that, I will do a podcast on how God meets your needs when you take your hands off the plow. He meets my needs. I woke up this morning, I was just thinking, I remember someone sent me some money to my account, but till today, I don't even know who that person is. I looked at my contacts. I don't have this name. How do I contact this person? I don't know. I just thought, God, how do you just inspire someone to just send me money? You just sent me. I've always been taught that you need to work hard and labor for money. You need to sweat. But God just says, no, you just need to commit yourself to my work and I will take care of your money needs. Oh, God has been so good to me. He has been so good to me. Just by focusing on his work. One of my biggest questions was, if I do this thing, how do I make money? But God has done it in various ways. Do you understand? Various ways. Once you take your hands off the plow and exchange his work, take on his own work and give him all those your own desires, he gives you everything you need to do his work. Everything you need. So again, what I will tell you as we go into the new year, please make a connection with God. Make him in the center. Hear from him. When God is the center of your life, everything aligns. Everything. My name is Tola T.A. Alabi, and you've been listening to my podcast, ProUp Masterclass.